Hi everyone, Robert Peak here with the Spontaneous Dungeon Master. I always feel like I'm going to explode when I say that. I'm really excited to talk about what I call noun-based preparation. This is the preparation that will allow you to create the bones of what you need to have a spontaneous, fun session very quickly and easily, right? 15 minutes or less. The heart of this is what we call nouns. Nouns are things that exist, monsters, dungeons, a plot to overthrow the king, right? The problem I think we often have, and where we get bogged down a lot in preparation, is in preparing encounters. And so much of the Dungeon Master's Guide and the tools and resources out there and all of this are centered around encounters. The problem with encounters is that they're kind of staged, right? So if you are staging something, if you are setting something up with a particular idea or concept about how the players are going to encounter whatever this is, and how it needs to flow from there, and where they're going, and how many monsters are involved, and what their different challenge ratings are, and all of this, require a lot of detail. Because you require a lot of control to control an encounter situation in a staged way. At the Spontaneous Dungeon Master, the idea is to get away from control, but to give yourself confidence to be able to be spontaneous and to be in the moment with your players more and more. So the idea of noun-based preparation is to get away from control, but also to create believability, because stuff that exists gives your world a sense of reality to it and concreteness, and it also really hands a lot of agency over to your players, lets your players decide, how are we going to deal with what is? So nouns are incredibly powerful. They're powerful in writing, and I think they're incredibly powerful in as like the central, keystone of preparation for spontaneous dungeon mastering sessions. So there's a set of questions that I like to walk through before every session. I'll put a link to just a really simple document with these questions in that you can use to just type out your own answers if you find that useful. So that's just a link will be there in the description. I'm going to go through the questions briefly. In subsequent videos, I'm going to do some examples, at least one example of a dungeon scenario, a kind of classic exploration scenario, and one of a more sort of social, political type scenario, an investigation scenario, something like that, using this structure. But for now, here are the questions, and here's actually the most important question. Question number one is, what exists that is cool? What exists that is cool? Well, this weird new creature, this arcane cult, this assassination attempt, this tomb of an ancient dwarven king, this portal to another dimension exists in the world, and it's cool and it's interesting. You probably could get away with just that. What exists that is cool? But from there, it's useful to tease out a few things about this. First of all, what's the backstory? So, rather than just a title, what's the backstory on this? How did this come about? What's really going on here is one of the main questions you kind of want to answer with that. So what exists that's cool, and what's the backstory here? The next question is, why is this interesting to the characters? You think it's cool. You're the DM, and you get to pick kind of what exists in the world. You get to be the world. You think this thing in the world is cool, but why will the characters want to interact with this? Why would they care? So that's that's a pivotal question to answer. Why is this interesting to the characters? Next, what are some possible rewards for interacting with this, whatever it is? What are some possible dangers for interacting with whatever this is? There's got to be risk, and there's got to be potential for reward. That in itself will draw the characters in, but you also want, you want potentially more than just that, more than just necessarily chasing after danger or chasing after a specific reward. So why is it interesting? What are the rewards? What are the dangers? And remember we mentioned back in the talking about the backstory, there's the story of what's going on, the backstory, and there may be kind of two things. There's what's going on the surface, and there's what's really going on. What is this really? What's really happening? And so the next question is a great question that Mike Shea asks a lot. So I flourish in his Lazy Dungeon Master book, which is, what are some clues about what's really going on? And in particular here, he makes the great point that having clues that can be manifest in lots of different ways gives you a lot of options so that you can continue to kind of move things along, reveal things to the players about the backstory, about what's really going on, without them having to find that one map that lives in that one room over there that they may never even enter. So what are some clues, some possible clues, some ways that they could catch on that something else is really going on? And you really don't need a lot of complicated twists necessarily. You just need, here's what's going on the surface, here's what's really going on. 2 layers and some clues to each. Next question is, where do we start? Where do the players begin? Again, Mike talks about the strong start. Grab everybody's attention, get them to put down their phones and focus. In literature, we call this beginning in media res often. So particularly with one-shots, I've found you don't start them off in the tavern with the mysterious guy that comes along and says, here's your quest. No, you start them out at the start of the quest. You start them out right there with an interesting scene and they're ready to go. And then you ask, hey, a couple days ago you encountered this guy and he laid out what this was. What are your motivations as characters for showing up and wanting to go on this adventure? It cuts out all of that stuff where you're kind of faffing around trying to figure out, do we want to do this or not, or any of that. You start where the action starts. Then you let the players tell you why their characters are in this and are up for this. Then from then on, you're tailoring that experience of their interaction with what that is that's cool to what they want to experience there. You're giving them the rewards potentially they want to experience. You're also giving them the danger that makes those rewards feel earned and interesting. So start where the action starts. Fill in just very quickly, why are you here? And off you go. Finally, the last question is, what is the structure for this that's going to potentially be useful? And I use 2.5 structures. Well, I use 3 structures. The first one is the 5-room dungeon. Fantastic. I'll put a link to that as a resource as well. The 5-room dungeon can be used for a lot more than just dungeons. It's perfect for a one-shot or any kind of single session, and very easily can be strung together in a campaign, sort of 5 rooms at a time, if you like, if you want to do a mega dungeon crawl. Equally applicable to wilderness, equally applicable to all kinds of situations where you want these different elements to unfold and for people to have paths they can go down to encounter these different elements. If it's more event-driven and less location-driven, I often use the 3 acts structure. The 3-act structure is just an ancient, I don't even know who I would link to as we came up with this first, but this really old idea that Act 1 is your kind of exposition, laying it out, here's what is, here's what's going on the surface. Act 2, you get to your twist. You get to here's what's really going on, something unusual or surprising. And Act 3 is the resolution of all that. Now, I said we're trying to remain open and not necessarily railroad the player. So I'll talk a little bit about how these 3 acts can work in such a way that you're not necessarily cramming it down their throats that they have to go from encounter A to B to C to have this kind of 3-fold experience of the story unfolding. So that half structure, well, really that 3rd structure that often can be useful either with the 5-room dungeon or with the 3 acts approach is this fronts and grim portents idea. Again, I'll put a link to what that is in the description. But the idea, it's a lot like having these clues to what's really going on, but putting them on a schedule, just putting them on a timeline that this and this and this is going to happen, leading the players to show them that the world is functioning, behind them, and if they don't get a move on, if they don't pick up the pace and keep, investigating and figuring out what's really going on here, things are potentially going to get worse and worse for them. So that works in a dungeon, but it works also particularly well with this more 3 acts driven kind of approach. So at the end of the day, what's cool? What's the story behind it? Why does this matter to the characters? What are some rewards for interacting with it? Some dangers in interacting with it? What are some clues you can sprinkle in about what's really going on in a variety of ways? Where do we start? How do we start in media res and get cut to it? And then what is the structure from there? What's a useful organizing paradigm? That all can be filled out in 15 minutes or less. I'll go through a few examples so you can see what this really looks like. And this has just been really, really helpful to me to be able to have enough kind of creative starting juice to be able to see me through a more sort of improvised, spontaneous campaign and have the confidence to roll with it the way it goes and have a lot of fun.